The first thing Claire noticed wasn't the blood. It was the sound. That low, vibrating growl that rolled through the alley like thunder swallowed by something mechanical. A motorcycle engine, revving in the night. Slow. Teasing. Like it was breathing. She had heard it before, 3 nights ago, when her sister was still alive. Now, every time it roared through the distance, her chest tightened, her pulse quickened, and a memory clawed its way back. The image of Lily sprawled across the asphalt, eyes glassy, skin pale under the sodium streetlights. Her neck had been opened like a ripped seam, the leather of her jacket slick and black with blood. The police said it was, likely, the work of the same killer terrorizing the city for weeks now. But, likely, wasn't enough for Claire. She had stopped sleeping. Stopped eating. The apartment had become a shrine to grief, Lily's leather boots still by the door, her perfume still clinging to the air. And now, tonight, that sound was back, somewhere beyond the rain-smeared windows. She stepped closer to the glass, straining to see past the flickering neon sign outside. The street looked empty. The growl faded. But her skin prickled with the feeling that she was being watched. A knock startled her. When she opened the door, a tall man stood there in a soaked trench coat, rain dripping from his dark hair. He didn't look like a cop, but he held himself with a stiffness, a cautious readiness, like someone who had been in dangerous places before. "Claire Morgan?" he asked. "Yes," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "My name's Daniel Rourke. I'm looking into the murders." His eyes flicked to a framed photo of Lily on the hallway table. "Your sister, Lily, she was one of them." Claire's fingers curled into fists. "I know. I think the man who killed her has done this before. Many times." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "And he's not going to stop." The air in the apartment seemed to thicken. Rain hammered the windows. Claire wanted to tell him to leave, but something in his voice, steady but urgent, kept her rooted. He continued, "Witnesses say they've seen him. Black motorcycle. Black helmet. They call him the Death Rider. He hunts at night. Cuts people down like it's personal." Claire swallowed hard. "So why are you here?" Daniel met her gaze. "Because I think you saw him before Lily died. And because I think he's watching you now." The words hung there, heavy, before the sound returned, low, guttural, vibrating through the walls. Claire's breath hitched. The window rattled. Somewhere in the wet, dark street, the motorcycle idled. And then it revved once. Long deep. Like it was smiling. The sound was closer now. Too close. Claire froze at the window, her fingers tightening on the curtain fabric. Rain streaked down the glass in silver lines, distorting the shape of the motorcycle's headlamp as it cut through the darkness. It wasn't just a light, it was an eye, glaring into her home. Daniel moved quickly, pushing the curtain shut. "Don't let him see you," he muttered. His voice was low but urgent, like the warning of someone who had seen this before. Claire's chest tightened. Why would he? "Because once he chooses you," Daniel said, glancing toward the door, "he doesn't stop until you're part of his collection." Before she could ask what that meant, the engine roared, deafening now, vibrating in her bones. Then it cut off. The sudden silence was worse. They stood in the darkened living room, listening to the soft patter of rain, the occasional hiss of car tires in the distance. Every shadow in the room seemed to lean toward them, listening. A metallic sound rang out, slow, deliberate. A gloved hand dragging something sharp along the brick wall outside. Claire's stomach churned. She could picture it in her mind, the killer, helmet reflecting the neon light, tracing his blade like a lover's touch, savoring the moment. Daniel moved toward the door, whispering, "Stay behind me." The hallway beyond was dim, the only light coming from a single buzzing fluorescent overhead. They stepped outside into the damp air, the city's sense of rain and gasoline clinging to their skin. The street looked empty. Then, from the mouth of the alley, he appeared. The Death Rider. Helmet black and glossy, visor reflecting Claire's terrified face. The leather of his jacket gleamed wet in the rain, stitched with strange red symbols that looked painted in something far darker than dye. In his right hand, long, curved steel, serrated and glinting under the streetlight. The killer tilted his head slowly, like a predator studying prey. Then, with no warning, he charged. Daniel shoved Claire toward the side street. The roar of the motorcycle erupted again, so loud it felt like it ripped the night apart. Tires screamed against the wet pavement as the killer lunged toward them, blade swinging down in a silver arc. The edge missed Claire's throat by inches, slicing into the wooden doorframe beside her, splinters exploding into her face. They ran. The Death Rider followed, the engine's howl chasing them through the narrow street. Every corner, every turn, he was there, his headlamp slicing through the dark like a hunting lantern. Claire's breath came in ragged bursts. Her sneakers slapped against the wet concrete. Behind her, the blade scraped against the wall again, a terrible, deliberate promise. When they finally ducked into an abandoned parking garage, the sound stopped. Only the rain. Only the dark. But in the blackness between the pillars, Claire saw the faint red glow of brake lights. He was already inside. The air inside the parking garage was thick with exhaust and damp concrete. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, each drop echoing like the ticking of a clock counting down. Claire pressed her back to a cold pillar, every muscle in her body trembling. Daniel crouched beside her, eyes scanning the dark. The red brake lights glowed faintly in the shadows, but the engine was silent now. The Death Rider was here, watching. Then came the sound. Not the roar. Not yet. Just the slow, metallic scrape of his blade dragging across the floor. The echo rolled through the garage, bouncing off every wall, impossible to tell where it came from. Claire's mouth went dry. He's playing with us. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's what he does. He likes fear slow-cooked. They moved cautiously between the rows of empty cars. Headlights caught in small puddles reflected like strange, staring eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, the killer's boots clicked against the concrete, deliberate, mocking steps. Then a sudden, deafening roar ripped through the air. The motorcycle burst from behind a row of parked sedans, headlamp blinding, blade raised. Daniel shoved Claire flat against the ground as the bike screamed past, the tip of the weapon slicing through her coat sleeve. The sound bounced away into the darkness, only to circle back like a predator doubling for the kill. The Death Rider swerved with inhuman precision, his tires leaving wet black trails on the concrete as he weaved between pillars, hunting them like rats. Daniel grabbed a discarded tire iron from the floor. When he comes again, run. But before Claire could respond, the killer changed tactics. The headlamp clicked off. The garage plunged into blackness. Claire strained to hear through the ringing in her ears. A faint creak of a boot. A slow inhale somewhere in the dark. Then, right behind her, a warm breath fogged against the back of her neck. She spun just as the blade came down. Daniel intercepted it, the tire iron catching the steel with a teeth-shattering clang. Sparks spat in the dark. The killer didn't grunt, didn't breathe hard, just pressed harder, like a machine built for this moment. Daniel's strength faltered. The blade slipped. The cut was fast, brutal. It opened him from shoulder to hip in one clean motion. Hot blood splattered across Claire's face, steaming in the cold air. Daniel made a choking sound, eyes wide, before collapsing at her feet. The Death Rider tilted his head at her, the visor reflecting her own horrified expression. Then he revved the engine once, short, sharp, final, and sped away into the night, leaving the stench of gasoline, blood, and fear behind. Claire fell to her knees, her sister's killer now having taken someone else from her. But this time, she knew something with icy certainty. He wasn't finished with her. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It was the kind of rain that seemed to sink into the ground, the walls, the bones. Claire stood under a black umbrella at the cemetery, her shoes sinking into the wet grass. Daniel's coffin was lowered into the earth with the slow precision of a ritual. Around her, the handful of mourners looked like they were attending a stranger's burial. No one spoke, no one cried. Even the priest's words seemed mechanical, read from memory rather than faith. Claire hadn't known Daniel long enough to mourn him the way she mourned Lily, but the brutality of his death had carved a second hollow in her chest. And beneath that grief was something sharper, guilt. If she hadn't been there, he might still be alive. Or maybe, he wouldn't. A police detective approached her after the service, a heavy-set man in a damp overcoat. His badge hung on a chain around his neck, and the smell of cigarette smoke clung to him. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his tone careful. "Detective Harper. Mind if I ask you a few questions about Daniel Rourke?" Claire frowned. "What about him? Your friend didn't work for any law enforcement agency. He's not in any registry." In fact, Harper glanced around before lowering his voice. "Daniel Rourke doesn't exist. Not under that name, not under any variation I can find." The words landed like a cold slap. "That's impossible. He said he was investigating." Harper cut her off with a shrug. "Plenty of people say things. We also found his fingerprints in a crime scene database. Not as a cop. As a suspect." Claire's breath caught. "For what?" The detective's gaze hardened. "Homicide. 2 years ago. The details are similar to what happened to your sister. A knot formed in her stomach." "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know who killed your sister, Ms. Morgan. But I'd be very careful about trusting strangers who show up at your door talking about justice." He tipped his hat slightly and left her standing alone in the drizzle, the cold sinking deeper. That night, back at her apartment, Claire sat in the dark. Lily's photo on the table seemed to watch her. The rain tapped softly against the window, steady, almost hypnotic. Then she heard it. Not the roar of the motorcycle, yet, but a soft, metallic clink, like a kickstand being lowered. The sound was outside, directly below her window. She forced herself to look. Under the dim streetlight, a motorcycle sat idling, its black frame slick with rain. But the rider wasn't wearing the helmet this time. The face that looked up at her was Daniel's. And he was smiling. Claire didn't remember leaving the window. One moment, she was staring down into the street, at Daniel's impossible, smiling face. The next, she was in the hallway, barefoot, clutching the kitchen knife she kept for protection. The elevator was too slow, so she took the stairs 2 at a time, the echo of her footfalls mixing with the low purr of the motorcycle outside. When she burst through the lobby doors, the rain slapped her face, cold and stinging. The bike was still there, its engine rumbling like a heartbeat, exhaust curling into the damp night air. The rider wore the helmet again now, black visor, expressionless. "Daniel," she shouted over the rain. "You're dead." "I saw." The helmet tilted slightly. Then the rider revved the engine and shot forward, not toward her, but past her, brushing so close she felt the rush of displaced air on her skin. She spun, watching the taillight vanish down the street. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Without thinking, she ran after him. The city seemed wrong tonight. Streetlights flickered and buzzed, their light pooling in strange, unnatural patterns. Storefronts were dark, windows smeared with condensation that warped her reflection. Every corner she turned, the sound of the motorcycle was there, sometimes ahead of her, sometimes behind. She wasn't sure how long she ran before she realized the streets were empty. Not just quiet, empty. No cars, no people, no movement except for her own breath clouding in the cold. The engine roared again, closer than ever. From the mouth of an alley, the Death Rider emerged. He moved slowly this time, the motorcycle crawling forward like a predator savoring the final approach. Claire backed away, knife raised, but her hands were trembling so badly the blade's tip danced in the air. "Why?" she managed to whisper. The rider dismounted, boots splashing in a shallow puddle. He stepped into the cone of a streetlight, and Claire's breath caught in her throat. It was Daniel's face under the visor. And it wasn't. The features were wrong. Like a wax figure left too close to heat. Skin sagged in unnatural folds, eyes too wide, the smile stretching farther than human lips could go. When he spoke, the voice was Daniel's, but it echoed, doubled, as if another voice was speaking in unison. "You let her die," it said. "Now you get to ride." Before she could move, the thing lunged. The knife was knocked from her hand, clattering into the gutter. He grabbed her wrist with gloved fingers, cold and crushing, and shoved something heavy and metallic into her palm. It was a motorcycle key. When she looked back up, he was gone. Only the idling motorcycle remained, its seat slick with rain, and blood. The key was cold in her hand, slick with rain and something thicker. She told herself it was only water. The motorcycle idled, steam curling from the exhaust like breath in winter. Its black frame gleamed under the streetlight, but when Claire touched the seat, her hand came away red. The smell of iron and gasoline filled her nose. Her instinct screamed to run. Instead, she swung a leg over the bike. The moment she turned the key, the world tilted. The engine's roar swallowed everything: street, rain, sky. Colors bled unnaturally into one another, neon pinks dripping into sickly yellows, black shadows blooming into crimson. The city wasn't empty anymore. It was full of faces. Lily's. Daniel's. And dozens she didn't know, each one frozen mid-scream, mouths torn wide, eyes bulging. They lined the sidewalks like mannequins in a grotesque parade. Some were missing arms. Others had jagged wounds that gaped open, showing the pale gleam of bone. The bike moved on its own, guiding her through the nightmare streets. Every turn brought her closer to a sound beneath the engine, wet, rhythmic, almost like chewing. Her hands trembled on the handlebars, but they were locked in place, welded to the controls by some force that wasn't her own. She turned a corner and saw him. The Death Rider stood in the center of the road, helmet reflecting the shifting, sick colors. In his hands, the blade dripped fresh blood. Something unrecognizable lay at his feet, a heap of red and white, twitching slightly. Claire wanted to stop. Instead, the bike accelerated. As she neared him, the rider pointed the blade at her chest. The helmet tilted, and she swore she could see her reflection in the visor, except it wasn't her face. It was Lily's. "You're next," the doubled voice hissed. The bike slammed to a stop in front of him. Without warning, the rider reached out, curling his gloved fingers around her helmetless head. Her vision flared white-hot, and suddenly she was inside him. She felt the weight of the leather jacket, the hum of the machine between her legs, the sticky warmth of blood drying on her gloves. She looked down and saw her own hands holding the blade. The street ahead was full of running figures. Victims. And God help her, she wanted to chase them. The vision snapped back. She was herself again, still on the bike, the rider gone. But in her hand, the blade remained. Heavy. Hungry. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren wailed. Claire knew with a cold certainty that they weren't coming to save her. They were coming for her. The sirens grew louder, bouncing off the rain-slick buildings like a warning from all directions. Claire sat astride the idling motorcycle, the blade heavy in her grip, the metal still warm as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The streets warped again, colors too sharp, shadows too deep, faces too close. The lined-up mannequins of corpses stared at her. Some were whispering now, voices wet and broken. Ride. The word slithered into her mind. She didn't know if it was the bike, the rider, or herself saying it anymore. Headlights bloomed in the distance. Police cruisers. 4 of them. Tires hissed against wet asphalt, doors opening before the cars even stopped. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one shouted. Claire's fingers tightened on the throttle instead. The rider's voice, doubled, distorted, filled her skull. "Show them what you've learned." The bike surged forward without her willing it. She leaned into the motion, blade raised. The first officer didn't have time to scream before the steel kissed his throat. Blood sprayed in a hot arc, mixing with the rain. She rode through them like a shadow given teeth. The blade tore, ripped, opened flesh like paper. Gunshots rang out, but the bullets didn't touch her, either missing entirely or thudding harmlessly into the leather that now felt like part of her skin. One officer's face was the last she saw clearly, wide eyes, mouth open in horror, the reflection of her own helmet in his gaze. Helmet. She hadn't put one on. And yet, she felt it. The weight on her head. The black visor between her and the world. When the last body fell, the street went quiet except for the low growl of the bike. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of gasoline and copper. In the reflection of a shop window, she saw herself, or thought she did. Black helmet. Black jacket. Blade in hand. She reached up, fingers brushing the visor. She pulled it off. Lily's face looked back at her. Not the Lily from her memories, the smiling sister, the warm voice. This Lily was pale, with lips split wide in a jagged grin, eyes clouded with something that was not life. "You let me die," the dead voice whispered. "Now we ride forever." Claire's scream was swallowed by the engine's roar as the rider, them, tore off into the night, vanishing into the labyrinth of empty streets. Behind them, the city was silent. Ahead, the road stretched into endless black. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the truth, there was no Death Rider. There never had been. Only her. Only the ride. Forever. Weeks later, the city tried to pretend it was normal again. The rain-washed streets gleamed under pale winter sunlight, news vans packed up, and the police claimed the motorcycle killer was dead, shot during the last confrontation. No body was shown. No name was given. People wanted to believe it was over. They always do. On the outskirts, in a stretch of highway no one used after dark, a black motorcycle cruised silently, its engine low, patient. The rider sat perfectly still, visor reflecting the endless asphalt ahead. A lone hitchhiker stood at the roadside, thumb out. When the bike slowed to a stop beside him, the rider tilted their helmet just enough for him to see inside. What he saw made him stumble back, muttering a prayer he didn't believe in. The rider laughed, or maybe the bike laughed for them, and the engine's growl rose into a roar. The hitchhiker's scream was swallowed by the wind as the blade flashed, wet and fast. By morning, the only trace was the sound. That low, vibrating growl drifting through the fog, moving from street to street, never stopping. Some say it's a copycat. Others say it's the same one. And a few whisper the name like a curse, Death Rider. But those who've heard the engine in the distance know the truth. It's not about who rides. It's about the ride. And it never ends.